Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Story of the Kingdoms. I'm super excited to be able to meet with everyone again and to share this. And we have a very special person with us today. And so if you would just like to introduce yourself and where it is you live.
Hi, my name is Karen Robertson, and I am David's mother-in-law. And I live on a tiny little island in the Atlantic Ocean on the south shore of Nova Scotia called Cape Sable Island. So if you Google it, you'll see it's just a little dot in the middle of the Atlantic.
in the middle of the ocean, which is how they get such great lobster.
True.
So, Karen, would you be able to just share with us real quickly a time when God's either answered a prayer, big or small, or when the kingdom of heaven felt real to you?
The time that I really feel that God answered in a very real way to me was a few years ago. I had gotten very, very sick, and we didn't know what was wrong at the time. I had been at the ER many times. I started losing weight, didn't know what was happening. I couldn't eat because of pain. And in the midst of that time, Vince was sent out of town to train for a new job. So I was by myself, alone, very weak, and couldn't stay home any longer by myself, which was I'm more of an independent person, so that was very hard for me. But I found myself in those times where I was in a lot of pain and not able to sleep, spending a lot of real quality time with the Lord. And in the midst of that struggle of not knowing what was wrong, not knowing what the outcome was going to be, I had the most amazing peace that you could ever imagine. I just knew that no matter what happened, everything was going to be okay, no matter which way, whether it was a really bad diagnosis or a good diagnosis, the Lord was with me. And so I just had a peace of no matter, like it didn't matter. Everything was going to be good.
And so I know, Karen, this wasn't one of the questions that I said I would ask. But for you, was that sense of peace more an answer to prayer, or was it more or less you experiencing maybe what it means when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven being here, of God's truth and of God's presence being with us? Was it something, so basically to boil down, was that something you were actually praying for, or is it something just as you were going through the midst, God just kind of blessed you with?
No, it was more of God just gave that peace. I was really just saying it doesn't matter which way this is going to go, because you're here, and I know you're here. And it's just the peace that enveloped me during that time was supernatural. It's not something we get here through any form of man's design. It was truly from God. Yeah.
And so, I mean, just kind of to ask the last question, out of everything that happened, and I mean, you did end up getting a diagnosis, and obviously you didn't kick the bucket because you're still here doing the interview. And I jokingly say that talking with Karen, but I was dating Olivia at the time. I don't think we were married. Maybe we were married, but it was pretty scary. And so, what exactly did you learn, or how did this affect your faith moving forward after experiencing that peace and after having that interaction with God?
The biggest thing I think that I came out of this with is that God is in control. He knows the plans He has for me. I don't have to worry about what tomorrow is going to present itself with, because I know that he is there. Despite the diagnosis, he was still in control. Despite, the consequential surgery down the road, he was there. The outcome, it's so neat, because through the surgery and the whole recovery thing, I was given new opportunities in ministry, which I would not have had it not been for this. So he has it in control.
Yeah, well, that's so awesome. And I think, as you were sharing that, obviously, I experienced some of this through you. This is kind of my first time hearing you share it like this with everyone at Newington. But, it really brings to my mind the passage about the sparrows. Like, why worry about tomorrow? Like, God cares after the sparrows. He cares after the passage found in Matthew. He cares after all these things, and he looks after us. And so what a great testimony, what a great assurance moving forward that you can trust. And I want to thank you, Karen, for coming on and sharing that. And I hope that everyone watching feels encouraged at this testimony of the fact that God is with us in the midst, and that he gives peace and he draws his children in. Hope you have a great night, and we'll see you later. Oh, you can say bye, Karen.
See ya.
See ya. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our time here at Stories of the Kingdom. Super excited to have this beautiful man with us today. A good friend of mine. We originally met when he broke into my room to use his Wi-Fi to talk to his ex-girlfriend. And from there, just a very strange relationship has come. And so, would you mind introducing ourselves? He is, in fact, in his own house. He didn't break into someone's house to use Wi-Fi. But will you please introduce yourself and tell us where you live?
Sure thing. I'm Jamin Melanson. I live currently in Amherst, Nova Scotia. And yeah, Dave's right. We did meet that way. I didn't break into his room. I asked his roommate if I could come in, and then his roommate left, and Dave then came in the room, was like, "How did you get in here?" But yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of crazy. So, Jamin, obviously I've known you for quite a while, and I've actually asked if you'd be willing to share this story. But can you just share with those watching a time when God's answered your prayer, or you experienced the kingdom of heaven where it felt kind of real for you?
Yeah. So I've been married for 6 years, coming up on 7 years. And my wife and I, we wanted to start a family pretty soon after we got married, about 1 to 2 years. So we started trying to have kids. And like a lot on that journey, we had some struggles. And we had 3 miscarriages along the way. And so it was disheartening and it was discouraging. But we kept praying through it. And eventually, last January, we were at church. The pastor was speaking about, handing something over to God, and Naomi and I felt like, well, we've been praying about it. We've had other people praying about it, but we've never actually made that commitment to go up front to the altar to basically lay it before God and say, God, this is yours. Take it. Do what you will. And so we did it that Sunday, and 6 weeks later, we found out we were 6 weeks pregnant. So the timing lined up pretty perfectly with everything. And just other weird stories, or not weird, but cool stories kind of surround it. My father had a vision of something that very day, and that spoke about a new beginning. And someone else in our church who we've come to trust, and she had a vision like a year and a couple months before that about seeing Naomi and I kneeling before God and turning around with a little boy in our arms. And so we didn't know if we were having a boy or girl, but we saw this as God answering this prayer. And even like, how you typically you wait, like you find out you're 6 weeks pregnant, you wait to tell people because you want to get past a certain point. But we called people out that night. We told them that night because Naomi and I felt so strongly that this was for real. This was going to happen. Just with everything, like with the prayer, with the focus, and with all that going on. And then COVID hit. So everything shut down, and then I couldn't go to appointments with Naomi to like see how she was doing. So she would go to appointments, and I'm sitting at home just like, all right, how's everything going? And even though we knew, like, we had this faith that God was going to answer and that God had answered, you still had that fear that, what if she does miscarry?
Right.
And so sitting at home just kind of waiting, but every time there was good answers. And eventually we found out he was a boy, and it was neat. And so, yeah, we gave birth to Caleb Matthias on October 21st at 7:05 p.m. And again, that was just a lengthy journey, but I'm not going to go into those details. But it was a good birth, and Caleb Matthias, his name means faithful gift of God, because we wanted to give him a name that resembled this story that pointed to God, that this was a promise of God. This was something that happened because God heard our prayers and He answered. And I even wrote like a blog about it because I wanted to make sure that this story, so that one day he could read it and look back and see how God had worked in that moment.
Yeah, and I think like you kind of shared, you were 1.5, almost 2 years married when you start trying, and you're going on 7 years with Caleb being adorable. Thankfully looks a lot like Naomi, and it's so incredible, especially with the visions and everything. And I remember, Jay, you kind of sharing that with me as it was all happening. Through all this, through everything, is there anything that you can walk away with saying, like, this really impacted my faith, or this is something that really changed the way I perceive God, that this is something that's just kind of radically changed the way that I engage with my relationship with God and my faith?
Yeah, I mean, I know for many of us we struggle with the faith aspect. And side note about that, though, like, Naomi and I figured out we have 3 pets that we received either in correlation or close to around each time we had a miscarriage.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
And we felt strongly that our firstborn was going to be a girl, and our first pet was a female cat. So, again, for us, it was just a neat thing of God. But that even just relates to all this, like having the faith to believe that when God is going to say something, He's going to do it.
Right.
And so God gave this vision to this lady, and she shared it with us. She was scared to share it with us because she didn't know, like, she didn't even know if we believed in that type of stuff. And she didn't know, like, what if it doesn't happen? She had her own fears going with that. And so it's having that belief, having that understanding that, God is going to answer. He doesn't always answer in our time and the way we want to. But I find, like, the more I consciously say that I'm going to trust Him, that I'm going to put my faith in Him, even when everything else is pointing in a different direction, when everything else, your anxiety, your depression, your stress, is pulling you away from that, is saying, you know what, you can't trust in that. You got to trust in what you think, and it's just like, no, I have to trust that God is going to pull through. And so that's been part of my journey, is just continue to learn that trust and have that faith.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of cool, that you felt prompted to go up and to really hand that over, and that's the same day that your friend and your dad kind of shared that they had this vision and things. Just real quick, and again, I didn't kind of shoot this. This is just natural talking. Was there any thought that perhaps maybe, the vision was adoption, or did you really feel that God was going to move in a miraculous way and Naomi was going to have Caleb and, it was going to be like that? Like, did you have that assurance, or were you still, I don't want to say clinging to the faith, but you were still trusting that no matter what, since we had handed it over to God, that he was going to see it through, whether it is adoption or whether it's birth, or we're trusting 100%. Was there a thought process to that, or?
We had talked about adoption, and we had even started looking into it, what it might look like. But we still never gave up that faith that it was going to be our own child. And then the vision, it was like, I don't remember the exact wording, but we turned around and Caleb was a baby,
right,
a newborn. And not that adoption can't happen, but those cases are very, very rare, very few,
right,
and far between. So
it was a vision specific thing.
Yeah. So it wasn't that we thought maybe God's gonna. It was more like, well, let's head down this road of adoption, because we don't know, that vision could happen 10 years from now.
Right.
So we could have kids. It didn't say we weren't going to have kids before that, but as it turned out, just with everything that was going on, we didn't pursue the adoption thing, and we got pregnant.
Wow. I like that. I'm glad now that I asked, because I hadn't heard it very vision specific, and what a great story. What a great testimony of God kind of working, and obviously, having known you and Naomi and knowing it personally, it was a great time of celebration. I look forward to Tristan beating up your baby. No, but then being able.
He's pretty strong already.
All right. Well, they're definitely going to be good friends. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight, for hearing this. Hopefully you feel encouraged. And as Jamin, shared, handing over to God and being able to trust and just having that faith, that when we hand it over, He will bless, regardless if it's right away or later on, what it is that we hand over. So thanks everyone for joining, and you have a great night.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Story of the Kingdom this evening. We have a great guest, someone that I met a few years ago, who God has just blessed, and I've loved hearing the story, and I love hearing how God is continuing to use him. So will you please introduce yourself to us?
Sure, yeah. My name's Dusty, and I'm the pastor of Parkway Church in Amherstview, Ontario, on the west side of Kingston. Before that, I was a youth pastor at Robertson Wesleyan Church for 17 years. So we are in the second year right now of a church plant on the west side of Kingston in the Amherstview neighborhood. Yeah. That's
awesome, and you've been doing some pretty exciting stuff there, even in the midst of COVID.
Yeah, it's been crazy. It's been nobody's cup of tea for sure. It's not been our favorite time, I'm sure, for most pastors, but God's been really faithful, and people have connected to our church since COVID, which is pretty neat, through just our online presence and some of those things. And it's a crazy time, but God is faithful for sure. Yeah.
And for those of you watching who have been connected to Newington, I had shared early on in COVID that there was a pastor who had a phenomenal turnout when they did online for the first time, and that's actually Pastor Dusty here that I had shared that Sunday morning as we kind of gave praise for that, for people connecting. And so, Dusty, would you just mind sharing a time when God answered a prayer, big or small, and when you kind of felt that the kingdom of heaven was real to you?
Yeah, for sure. When you asked me to do this, I was just actually remembering back to our church plant just beginning and getting going, and we had a team pulled together a couple years ago that were ready to go plant this church of about 40 people. Kids, adults, teenagers, a big mix of people there. But heading out, the team was coming together. People were supporting the project financially, prayerfully, all those things. but we didn't have a venue. And I sort of had this, written down on a piece of paper, all the doors to knock on to find a place to meet. And boy, it was weeks of just, dropping in, calling, knocking on doors, of looking for a location for us to meet for service. And the last one on my list was a school in our neighborhood. And to be honest, it was, somebody earlier in the journey, off the cuff, in the neighborhood said, "Oh, you probably don't want to use that school." And I, for whatever reason, it sort of ended on the last of the list. And I remember in a real, I would say, moment of, was it a nice, comfortable, lovely prayer? Probably not. I remember driving to that school pretty tearfully and a little bit just sort of like, "God, you've called us to do this. There is not a place that we've been able to find that will host us to meet." And the prayer went something like, "God, you can miraculously cause a meeting place to grow up from the ground if you wanted to." Like it was sort of that kind of prayer.
Right.
And I was just like, "God, I have to believe you're going to be faithful in this." So the last sort of school I went to, I walked in the front door. The principal was already there, and I just introduced myself and said, "Hey, we're a new church in the neighborhood, looking for a place." To me, I don't even think I said that. I think it just said, "We're a new church in the neighborhood. I just want to say hi and meet different people leading in the community and different things like that." And the principal said, "Well, have you found a place to meet yet?" And I was like, "We actually haven't." And she said, "Well, do you want to meet here?" And it really did. Like I had sort of prayed a very, I think a faith-filled prayer that really was heartfelt and coming out of a place of real, "God, if you don't pull this off, it's not going to work," right? And boy, it was that afternoon. I remember calling my wife after we had found this location and just said, "You would not believe what happened." Like, we prayed boldly, and it happened that day, and God came through for us. Since COVID, obviously, everything's online. Every rental in town is off right now, right? So we've had to really move all of our ministry online, and we've been meeting once a month, kind of thing, in a location farther into the city. Not our long-term plan, but it's working for now. And but you know what? It's a reminder God came through for us that way, a couple years ago almost now, and He's going to work things out now too. We have to have faith that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of just to follow up. I mean, it's not that you hadn't been praying before for a place, and I think that's incredible. Like the last place on your list, and I remember you sharing this a little bit in an email that you sent out, and obviously going the church planning boot camps and stuff with you, and that's just incredible. I think you had another story as well that you wanted to share. Or was that it? That's the main thing I was thinking of. You had another question, I think, connected to kingdom there. Yeah. Ask me the question again. I'll put it this way: is there a time in your life where you felt that the kingdom of heaven, like you really experienced what Jesus talked about the kingdom of heaven, or what the kingdom of heaven was like, or is going to be like? Yeah, you know what? This is an unconnected story. It's a little bit of an older one. But when I was in Bible college, actually, I was reminded of this story this past week when I was preaching, and I shared it there as well. But when I was in Bible college, I remember at Kingswood University, actually, a group of us were helping out with a worship conference in St. John, New Brunswick, and at the arena, it's sort of the hockey arena there was probably a few thousand people at it. It was kind of a big deal. There were British worship leaders that were there, Tim Hughes, people like that were pretty excited to see them. And the cool thing about it was we all showed up to see these awesome worship leaders lead worship. And one night in particular, it was actually Tim Hughes leading worship. "Here I'm to Worship," the guy that wrote that song, and he finished the worship set, and they were sort of setting their guitar stuff and things like that down. And you couldn't recreate this. This is not something you could set up, right? It happened, and anyone who's there has a memory that's really beautiful and special. It is a kingdom of heaven moment, I think. And all the bands set their instruments down, and there was a young gentleman up front that we'd been sort of in a group of people worshiping in this sort of setting up front. So you were around, you saw people around you, and it was sort of obvious that this young gentleman would have had some disabilities and things like that, and he was very engaged in worship. And the band finished, and this young guy up front just kept on singing, like on his own,
really loudly, probably not real great. Like, I mean, obviously not in the same, he wasn't in key like the guys on stage were, right? And he just kept on singing. And I watched this awkward few seconds where people weren't sure what to do, like, should somebody tell this guy to stop? And instead, the entire arena just joined in, being led by this guy in worship.
Wow.
It started with 5 or 6 or 10 or 20, and pretty soon the whole place was following, sort of this nameless person up front. He was leading us all in worship. And there was something, I don't know how to describe it. I've only been around something this once or twice in my life where it happened this way. Obviously, we've sensed the Spirit of God other ways in our life, but something happened where I almost felt, the band knew it too, like they'd gone off stage, like something really miraculous had happened. And it was almost like the Spirit of God just moved in and nobody was in charge anymore. Like all the professionals sat down and he was singing, and I can only describe it as this, like there was people singing sort of spontaneously on one side of the arena, and people were singing in harmony with them on the other side of the arena. There was something, people had chills down their spine, like something happened that you could never plan for, manifest, or create, and it was led by this random dude up front that had some intellectual disability, some of those things, right? And he was our worship leader. Like there was something about it that just took all the professionalism out of it, took all of the show part out of it, right? Yeah. And it became this very unique thing, and I thought, man, this is so cool. This is what the kingdom of God's all about. Like God miraculously moving this way, and we're not sure who's in charge. The guy who spurred this on was not the professional worship guy in the room. Like, and it seems so genuine and so pure. I don't think I've ever been in a room like that before, and I've been at some other big, concerty worship events where something just so special happened, and it was just such a, like, this is what heaven will be like, right? This is a bit of kingdom of heaven on earth, and I'll remember it forever. It was a really meaningful thing, and I think even shaped a little bit, some of my thoughts maybe on what worship really is. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. That's incredible, and I mean, even as you share that, like all I can think of is he was worshiping, right? It was just a pure heart worshiping, and the Spirit moved. Based either on one of those or two of those things. You kind of already shared a little bit about how it's affected your faith, but how did these occurrences maybe affect your faith or your perspective on things moving forward? Yeah,
you know what? I think for me any kind of local church body, we're on a journey, right, of being Christ's hand and feet, of sharing the gospel in our neighborhood, all those kind of things. And it's a reminder to me a little bit, the first story especially, of just there are moments where we're not sure what's happening or what's gonna like how things are gonna work their way out. Lots of them right now during COVID, right? Of just unsureties about what church is going to look like in the future, what our role maybe as pastors or Christian leaders are even going to look like. Like I've heard the stories, of pastors that in some ways are, retiring early or finding other jobs now. So many of the things that they loved about being a pastor have sort of been closed down by some of the lockdowns and some of the restrictions and all of those things, and it's a reminder in the middle of it, that God is faithful, like, and we can't see every end that He's working out of what He's causing us to become and be, and we in a real small way, there was sort of that test a little bit of like trusting God with a meeting place. We were in the school maybe for like 2 or 3 months, and a teacher strike happened, and we had to move from the school we were in. We didn't know how long, right? Teacher strikes, they can go on a while sometimes. And it really was just one Sunday that, the teachers went on strike, and we lost our meeting place. And I spent a week sort of scrambling around finding a place in the meantime. And we landed at a local Legion on Sunday. And, everything in the church planner book said, like, don't change locations every 2 weeks, like things like that. And, so we're meeting at this Legion, and the people that owned it were so helpful and were great and in an emergency, right? But we were there, and we had like new people show up that Sunday, like all the things they were sort of telling us about, like, and it's good advice. Find a steady location to meet, and it is. But people saw our church plant temporary flag sign on the side of the road and showed up at service that morning. So it's just, God's faithful. Like, he knows. And some of those things that are rattles to our faith that feel enormous, when I think of the disruption that COVID has been compared to a teacher strike, it's been absolutely disruptive. But it's a reminder, if he can help you during the teacher strike, he can help you during pandemic. God's arms are not too small to intervene in any kind of situation and help us learn how to thrive and grow, even in the most unlikely of places and circumstances. So, awesome.
Wow. That's great. And Pastor Dusty did not know I was going to say this, but if you want to stay up to date on Parkway, because actually you're not very far from us. What, like an hour, for sure, hour and a half, I think.
Not too far. Yeah.
And so below in the actually like below where his head is, we'll put information on his church plant. So if you want to keep tabs on how God is using him, awesome. and what God's doing, the information for those of you watching will be there. But Dusty, thank you so much for sharing that, and I just hope for everyone watching that this is a huge encouragement that God, as you said, God's arms are not too small that he can't reach into a situation.
Awesome. Yeah, no, for sure. God bless you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving a link to our church there, where God's been working. He's been working in all of our churches in some beautiful ways through this season.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Pastor Dave, for inviting me this way. Yeah, it's great.
All right, we'll see everyone.
God bless.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Stories, the Kingdom Testimony time. I have with us tonight, probably, I think Dawn was the first person. Oh, I just introduced her. Oops. The first person that we met when we came here to visit Newington, an absolutely wonderful lady. So even though I did technically already say your name, would you mind introducing yourself?
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I'm Dawn Kielec. I've been with the church since 1981. And been really blessed by it.
Wow. So Dawn, many people watching already kind of know the format and the flow here, but just to kind of state the question, would you mind sharing with us a time that God answered a prayer that you had, or a time that you kind of experienced the kingdom of heaven?
Yeah, for sure. I have a sister, Violet, in Florida. And we used to go down and see her yearly. And it's been about 7 years since I'd been down. But when not the last time, the time before I was down, I got contacted by her next door neighbor saying that she was in bad shape to come. And she had dementia, very bad. And she was living in very poor condition. She couldn't look after herself. So I didn't know what I was going to find out when I got down, but I mean, the neighbor was bang on as to what was happening. So we contacted social services there, and they sent someone to see her, and they said she couldn't stay alone. So we went to court, and the court gave me temporary guardianship for her until a court-appointed guardian was made for her. And then we started looking for retirement homes to put her in because she couldn't stay alone anymore. And she seen a few, didn't like any of them. Of course, she didn't want to move, but one in particular she really disliked. So in the meantime, the new guardian informed us that she had found a home for her, and that she would pick her up and take her to that home. And we were to meet her there. But ultimately, she called us back later and said, you bring her and we'll meet you here with her. So Bill was upset because he said, now your sister's going to blame you for putting her in this home. So we took her. And when we arrived there, we looked at one another and we sort of said, this is the home that she said she definitely did not want to be in. So, I'm praying under my breath, and Lord, that, this is it, that she should accept this. She went willingly into the home. They gave us a tour. They fed us lunch. And then we had a nice visit. And then I'm thinking, okay, it's time that we need to go. So what are we going to see? What's going to happen? So she just spoke up, and she said, she always called us kids. Okay, kids, you can go now. I'm fine here.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that was just like, and that just floored me. Like, I was just so surprised and so, sure that, God had a hand in this every step of the way. And I just praise the Lord for the way he works in ways like that.
Yeah, I mean, because that's like, this was like the one that she didn't want to be in,
Right.
and everything was, from sharing, kind of messed up, and to end that, it was probably a few hours, if that, to that complete change in character and everything.
Mm-hmm. And we've, I haven't seen her in a long time since, before Bill got sick, but we had went down after that and seen her in the home, and she was quite settled in and quite happy there.
Wow. So was there anything that you learned about your faith, about prayer, any way that affected kind of how you perceive your relationship with God?
Well, it was just so God driven, because of each step that he took hold of, and what he did, to help to bring it all together.
Yeah, and really in a very quick format. Like, this wasn't like, something you were necessarily praying months and months on. It was just a quick, simple prayer of, hey, let her be okay with this.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you were ready to leave, and it seems like she enjoyed it, because you said when she went down, she seems to enjoy it when you visited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but she just felt so comfortable and felt at home for, than the previous visits. She barely stepped in the door the first time we went, and nope, this is not for me. I do not like it.
Wow.
So, it's marvelous just to see how God works in every step of the way, if we let him.
Yeah, and the timeliness of it too, right? Because she could have just fought that, tooth and nail, but very
Yes,
quickly just moved.
because dementia patients, you don't know, what they're going to be like.
Yeah.
They could turn on a dime, eh? So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Dawn, thanks for sharing that testimony. And I think it just, it speaks of, even when we offer a quick prayer, from our heart for God to move, that he does, he hears our prayers, and even though in this case, it was him working in really a miraculous way, he hears every prayer, regardless of if it's one we've been praying on our knees for months, or one we offer when we drive up with someone to a building. So
yes, gotta let God work in his timing.
Amen. Well, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you were encouraged by Dawn's message, and we look forward to seeing you on our next night. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our time of testimony during our Story of the Kingdom series. I have with me a great guy that went to Kingswood University. We met during church planning assessment. I think is the first time that we met. Just awesome guy. God has been doing incredible things in his life. He's not going to share his whole testimony with us, because that sometimes those can be as long as we've lived. But why don't you introduce yourself to us, and then we'll hear about how God has answered prayers.
Sure. Well, it's good to talk to you again, Dave, and glad to be a part of this. My name is Nathan Maskery, and I'm planning a church in Thunder Bay, Ontario. So from where you are, if you went north and west for probably 14 hours, you'd eventually get to Thunder Bay, and that's where I am. So I'm married to a beautiful woman named Vicky. We have 6 kids. 5 are biological, and we're in the process of adopting number 6. And then we're done, like totally done. Our van is full. We have an 8-passenger van, and we don't want anything bigger, and we don't want 2 vehicles at this point. So we're done with that. So yeah, we're about 3.5 years in on a church plant called Transformation Church in a neighborhood right kind of in the center, kind of a rough area of Thunder Bay, and we've seen God do some pretty incredible things. And so that's just a little bit of who I am and where we are.
Yeah, and some incredible things even before you got there. That happened there. And so I mean, there's numerous things, numerous times I'm sure that you can think of when God's answered prayers or you've seen the kingdom of heaven. But would you mind just sharing a time where you really sensed that God answered a prayer that you kind of lifted up to him?
Yeah, so I'll share kind of, I think it's probably one of the most unique times that I've heard God's voice. I hear him a lot when I read scripture or listen to a sermon, and you can kind of get a sense of what maybe he's saying, and that happens more regularly when you read scripture. But then there's these times where God steps out of the norm and speaks very clearly. And so for us, it was actually in how he told us to move to Thunder Bay. And so my wife and I are both Maritimers. We grew up in the Maritimes, spent our whole life there, and ended up going to Kingswood kind of later in life. So when I went to university, I already had 4 kids, and God miraculously provided for us to go. That's a whole other story in itself. And near the end we probably had about 1.5 2 years left of schooling when I met Mark Parker, who was at the time in charge of church planting for the Central Canada District. And he was on campus, and just kind of bumped into him, and we had a conversation about church planting. And in the end of the conversation, he said, I really think you should move to Thunder Bay. We have a work we're trying to get started there, and we need somebody to come in and take over and basically do a replant. And I was like, I at that point I had heard that Thunder Bay existed, but that was about it. We had driven through it when I was a kid, and we drove across Canada, but I didn't know anything about it at all. And I was like, I don't really know. And so that actually started a 6-month conversation between Mark Parker and my wife and I. Wow. And so we talked about it back and forth, and there was other options that we were considering as far as church planting. At one point we were going to move to Boston. And anyway, we just tossed some things around, and we get to the end of this 6-month mark, and Mark Parker said, "Well, I need you to tell me if you're going to move to Thunder Bay, because if you're not, we're going to look for someone else." And this was a conversation we had. He was back in Sussex at Kingswood when we were having this conversation, and he had taken out my wife and I and bought us like chicken wings or pizza or something. And our kids were actually home with a babysitter, and the babysitter had put them to bed. And so, we said, okay, we'll make a decision soon. And we went home that night, and my wife, and if you know my wife, Vicky, she's not vocal like I am. I'm a very extroverted person. I'm like really out there in my personality. I'm a preacher, so that makes sense. But she's very quiet about her faith. And even with us personally, it's rare that Vicky prays out loud, even when it's just the 2 of us. And so the reason I say that is because of what happened next. So we were going to bed, and she said, all right, if God wants us to move to Thunder Bay, we need for him to tell us clearly. And so I'm going to pray that he tells us clearly. And I said, oh, great, go ahead. So she prayed, and in the prayer, she said, God, I just pray that if you want us to move to Thunder Bay to plant this church, you would tell us in a clear way, even a dream. It's just, she suggested in the prayer that maybe God would speak in a dream. And so I was like, well, that's a pretty bold ask. So anyways, we went to sleep that night, and our kids didn't know we were praying this. And by the way, our kids were actually really opposed to the idea of moving to Thunder Bay. They did not want to go to Thunder Bay. It's a 26-hour drive from Moncton, the city we're from.
Right.
Anyway, so they didn't know that she had prayed that. And anyway, we woke up the next morning, and I said, did you dream anything? And she said, no, which I was glad, because I thought, well, if she had a dream something, I would have thought, well, it was just the chicken wings and the pizza, and the fact that we were thinking about it, right? So maybe that's. So anyway, she said no, and like within seconds, I heard our kids had gotten up. It was a Saturday morning, and so I slept in a little bit. Our kids had gotten up and started making breakfast for themselves, and our oldest daughter, who was 11 at the time, I heard her say to the other kids at the table, she goes, I had a dream last night where I heard a voice say, you're moving to Thunder Bay. And then I saw our family get in our van and drive off. And I saw our family waving as we left. And I was like I jumped up out of the bed and I ran into the kitchen and I was like, what? Like, explain this dream. And so and like I said, they didn't know that we had prayed that. And so she explained the dream and in more detail, and I was blown away. And so for me, I was like, this is crazy. Maybe I should just call Mark. And then for my wife, Vicky, what really shocked her was that, the dream itself was an answer to prayer, obviously.
Right.
But the attitudes of our kids completely shifted. All of a sudden, they started getting excited about Thunder Bay, and they were like, we were going to go and be a part of planting a church, and just their whole attitudes shifted. And so anyway, the end of the story is I called Mark and I said, Mark, this might sound, I felt weird even saying it. I was like, this may sound crazy, and I don't know if you have people make decisions based on dreams very often, but here's what happened. So we're just going to say yes. We're going to go to Thunder Bay. God answered prayer very clearly. There was other confirmations along the way, but this was like the tipping point for us. And I remember Mark on the phone saying, I'm getting shivers down my spine. Even the way you're describing this. And so I was like, yeah, it's one of those things. It's like shivers and dreams and all of that stuff, but it was so clearly an answer to prayer and so clearly the Lord. And so we said yes. And so this spring this July will be 4 years that we've been in Thunder Bay, and we've seen God do some incredible things. Yeah,
some really incredible things. And I mean, for some of you guys, those in Newington, we are stealing some of Nathan's ideas to use at our church. So we'll give him I'll give him full credit when I share that with the church, some of these ideas. But God's been doing great things in your church plant there, even before you arrived, working in the hearts of the people there. But I mean, was that something normal for you? Like, this wasn't a question I planned or shared with, but was it normal? You shared your wife, like this wasn't a normal thing for her to kind of be outspoken like that, but had God spoken to dreams before in your life, or was this just kind of a new experience altogether?
I think it was fairly new as far as like God speaking about direction through a dream like that. When I was younger, my mom actually used to study dreams and how God speaks through dreams from scripture and then today. And so I remember when I was younger, I used to have dreams, but nothing like that. Like, I wouldn't say that this was normal to hear from God in this way. I'm kind of a skeptical person when it comes to stuff like that. Like, I want to know that it's actually the Lord and not just wishful thinking or hoping that I'm hearing something. But this was it was just so back to back. Like, Vicky, to take the step to pray the way she did with the kind of boldness she prayed with was uncharacteristic. And then for the dream to come from somebody that didn't even know we had prayed that.
Right.
And for it the timing of it and the change of the attitude and the timing of it, like we needed to make a decision very quickly. And so that it was very abnormal for God to speak that way. I wish that he spoke that way all the time. Like I always say, like, I just wish he'd speak audibly sometimes. I could just hear it. And he does do that, but it's not often. So yeah, it was definitely out of the ordinary.
Wow. So how did that affect your faith? Like after kind of that experience, after seeing anything, what lasting impression has that kind of made, or what instant impression did that make that's affected your faith moving forward?
I think for me, the answer I'll give to that is like, when God calls you to do something that is a big step of faith for you, if he's made it clear, then when things get hard, you can look back and say, no, I know God wanted me to do this. And so how it's affected my faith is I think it's just given me stability. So if we had come to Thunder Bay and kind of been like, well, maybe God wants us to be there, we probably would have left. I mean, planting a church, it's I could tell you all kinds of incredible stories of God's provision and what he's done, and it's amazing. But I could also tell you all kinds of stories of like the challenges and the difficulties. And I mean, we've got all our family back on the East Coast, and even in this lockdown, we haven't been able to take our kids home. So they haven't been back to visit in almost 4 years. And there's just a lot of challenges. And if I didn't have something to look back on to say, well, God clearly called us, I would have been really tempted to just pick up and go. But God made it really clear that this is what he was calling us to do. So when things got hard, I was able to just take comfort in the fact that, no, God God called us here. He's not going to leave us. He's with us, and he's providing, and he's gonna get us through. So I think that what it did for me in my faith is just giving me this sense of stability, that God is going to be with us, and he's not going to, he hasn't called us to something that's going to be a negative thing. We can trust him.
Yeah, almost kind of similar to the idea of an Ebenezer. This point that God has led us this far. Well, I mean, Nathan, that's absolutely, like, I've never heard this story. Even when we were at and I, just like Mark, I had chills listening to God's call, and I think it's very clear that he's provided for you. And what a great reminder. If he calls us, we can look back and say through the hard times, like, yes, this is what he's called us to do. And so, Nathan, I just want to thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. Like we did with Dusty, we will put information for Nathan's church below in the comments. So if you want to hear him speak, if you're just sick of hearing me speak, or you just want to see how God's continuing to move in Transformation Church in Thunder Bay, you'll be able to follow up and everything with that. So thank you so much for joining us, Nathan, and thank you everyone for watching.
Okay, see you later. I didn't know if I was supposed to say anything. Well, it was really great to be a part of it, and hopefully someday I'll get to meet you all in person. Zoom is awkward, so.
Well, all right. So we'll see you later. God bless in what you're doing.
Thank you. Blessings.